Before my sister's wedding, our driver whispered something to me that I will never forget for the rest of my life. He didn't say it dramatically. He didn't say it like it was a story. He said it the way someone says it when they are trying to protect you from something that is already happening, something that has already been set in motion, something that you are the last person to know about. He pulled the car over on a quiet stretch of road, turned slightly in his seat, and said, "Lie down on the back seat. Cover yourself with a blanket. You need to hear this." I laughed. I actually laughed, because that is what you do when something is so far outside the reality you have been living in that your body doesn't know how to respond to it seriously. My name is Isla. I am the older sister, the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who has been holding this family together since before anyone even noticed the structure was crumbling. I was in that car on the way to finalize floral payments for my sister Amaya's wedding. I was exhausted, I was proud, and I was completely, absolutely unaware that my life was about to be cut in half like paper. I told Rafi I wasn't hiding in my own family's car. Rafi has been our driver for 11 years. He watched me grow up. He drove me to university on my first day. He picked me up the night my ex left me crying on a sidewalk in the rain, and he didn't ask a single question. He just handed me a bottle of water and drove. When he looked at me that day and said, "Nissa, please trust me," his voice wasn't dramatic. It wasn't urgent in the way people get when they want attention. It was protective. It was the voice of someone who already knows what is coming and is trying to soften the blow before it lands. So reluctantly, irritated, I slid down onto the back seat and pulled that blanket over myself like a child playing a game I didn't understand yet. 30 minutes later, the car stopped outside my parents' house. Doors opened. I heard my father's voice. I heard my sister's laughter. And then I heard my name. They said my name, and I stopped breathing. After tomorrow, she won't suspect anything. My father's voice was casual, almost bored, like he was discussing a logistics update at a business meeting, not his firstborn daughter. She transferred the final amount last night, he continued. After the wedding, we'll move the accounts. Then Amaya laughed. That soft, practiced, delicate bride laugh she had been perfecting over the past year. "I told you she'd do it," she said. "She has a hero complex. She needs to feel needed." I lay under that blanket completely still. The fabric smelled like leather and Rafi's cologne. My heart was pounding so hard I was genuinely terrified they would hear it through the car door. Hero complex. That is what they called it. That is the phrase my sister used to describe 11 years of my sacrifice. For context, I funded 70% of that wedding. The venue deposit was mine. The designer was mine. The emergency venue upgrade, when Amaya cried for 3 days about the aesthetic not being right, was mine. I co-signed a temporary loan for my father's business 3 years ago that I quietly ended up repaying entirely by myself, because that is what older daughters do in families like ours. We hold the structure up while everyone else decorates it. We don't get to be the bride. We get to be the foundation. But what I was hearing under that blanket wasn't just about money. 3 months before the wedding, I had asked to see the business statements tied to the loan I had repaid. My father brushed it off every single time. After the wedding, he kept saying, "Every difficult question in this family got postponed until after the wedding." Now I understood why. "They'll freeze her access once we transfer ownership," Amaya added lightly, like she was commenting on a seating arrangement. Transfer ownership. My stomach dropped so hard it felt physical. Transfer ownership of what exactly? And then a name entered the conversation that shattered something inside me that I don't think has fully healed since. "Armin already signed," my father said. Silence. Not from outside the car. From inside my chest. Armin. My fiancé. The man who held my hand in the hospital hallway when my mother had surgery and didn't say a word because he knew I didn't need words. The man who looked at me one evening and said, "You carry too much alone. Let me help you." My sister's voice softened with satisfaction. He said once the wedding is done, it'll be cleaner. No drama before mine. Cleaner. Like I was paperwork. Like I was an inconvenient line item that needed to be tidied up after the celebration was over. I heard shuffling, car doors closing, footsteps moving away toward the house. Rafi didn't start the engine. He knew I needed a moment before I could breathe again, let alone speak. My mind was rewinding violently. 2 months before the wedding, Armin had asked me to sign a document. A temporary restructuring agreement, he called it, for tax optimization purposes. He explained it calmly over dinner with that quiet confidence he always had about financial things. He worked in finance. I trusted him. I skimmed it. I signed it. Because love doesn't expect betrayal written in fine print. Because when someone holds your hand through your mother's surgery, you don't imagine they are simultaneously building the architecture of your removal. My father's voice came again, lower this time, almost satisfied. After tomorrow, she won't control the company's shares. Armin will, through Amaya's husband. Everything clicked. Every single piece fell into place at the exact same moment, like a machine completing its cycle. The loan I repaid. The business I rebuilt during the hardest years. The shares that had been temporarily moved under my name during restructuring. They were never planning to give them back. They were using me as a temporary holder, a convenient signatory, a woman too loyal to ask the right questions at the right time. And the worst part, the part that made something inside me go completely cold and completely quiet, was that they had planned to do it the morning after I helped my sister walk down the aisle. I pushed the blanket off. I sat up. I looked at the back of Rafi's head and I said 2 words. Drive. My voice didn't shake, but something inside me had just reorganized itself permanently. The wedding was a masterpiece. Crystal chandeliers caught the light like something from a magazine. Imported orchids lined every surface. A string quartet played softly under gold drapes while guests in beautiful clothes moved through the space that I had paid for and planned and upgraded and saved 3 times over. People kept coming up to my father and congratulating him on how well the family had recovered financially. He smiled and accepted it graciously. I smiled too. I fixed Amaya's veil before she walked down the aisle. I straightened it carefully, my hands steady, my face composed. She looked at me with those soft eyes and whispered, "None of this would have happened without you." I almost laughed out loud. I almost said, "I know exactly how true that is, and so do you." But I didn't. I smiled, because I had already made my decision sitting at the back of that car and scenes were not part of it. The real humiliation didn't happen privately. It happened on stage, in front of everyone, after the vows and the applause and the first dance. My father tapped his glass and called me forward. "Isla," he said warmly into the microphone, and the crowd turned toward me with warm, oblivious smiles. "The backbone of this family," he said, and people clapped. He continued, "As part of our growth, we are proud to announce that our family business is officially transitioning leadership to the next generation." A screen behind the head table lit up. There were documents on it. Photos. A smiling picture of Armin signing papers beside my new brother-in-law. Effective immediately, my father said proudly, ownership had been restructured. I had not been told. I had not been consulted. My signature was on documents in that presentation that I had signed over dinner while being told they were temporary tax paperwork. Armin stepped up beside me, slid his arm around my waist, and whispered into my ear without moving his smile, "Don't make a scene. We'll talk later." The crowd applauded. They thought they were watching a celebration. They didn't see the contract timestamp. They didn't see that the documents had been signed 2 days ago and backdated to match my digital signature from 2 months earlier. That was the moment I understood completely. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had forged me into their exit strategy. They had used my name, my loyalty, my money, my signature, and my silence as the foundation of something I was never meant to benefit from. And they genuinely believed I would stay quiet. That was their first mistake. I did not make a scene at that wedding. I smiled for the photos. I toasted the bride. I danced exactly once with Armin while he whispered damage control into my ear. "It's temporary. It's strategic. You're overreacting." I nodded like a woman who believed every word. I kissed my sister on the cheek. I said goodbye to my parents. And then I went home alone, heels in my hand, makeup still on, and I sat down at my dining table at 2:14 in the morning and I opened my laptop. Pain doesn't always explode. Sometimes it organizes. I had dual authentication access to every operational account in that business because 3 years ago I had insisted on it for efficiency purposes. Nobody had thought to remove it because nobody had imagined I would ever use it as anything other than a convenience. I had copies, digital and physical, of every document I had ever signed for that company, every vendor contract, every supplier agreement, every deferred liability clause, every transitional authorization requirement. They thought I had skimmed and signed and forgotten. They forgot who rebuilt their collapsing accounts during lockdown when my father didn't know how to file a digital claim and my sister was busy redecorating her apartment. They forgot who sat across from vendors and negotiated terms that saved them hundreds of thousands. They forgot that I had quietly insisted 3 years ago on inserting transitional clauses into every major vendor contract that required my written authorization before any transfer of active supplier relationships could take effect. No authorization from me meant no vendors. No vendors meant no supply chain. No supply chain meant no product launch the following quarter. No product launch meant no valuation. They hadn't stolen a crown. They had stolen a shell, and they didn't know yet that the shell was empty without me. By 3 a.m, I was not crying. I was mapping. The restructuring gave Armin controlling shares. But operational liquidity, vendor contracts, deferred tax liabilities, those were all tied to transitional clauses that still bore my name. Clauses that I had written into those agreements myself for exactly this kind of situation, though I had never imagined the situation would be my own family. I drafted 3 emails, one to the top supplier, one to the regional distributor, one to the investor Armin had been courting for the past 6 weeks, the one whose confidence in the new leadership structure was essential to the entire valuation. Subject line: regarding structural clarifications before Monday. I was not going to scream. I was not going to accuse. I was not going to show up at anyone's door with tears or ultimatums. I was going to let the architecture collapse, quietly, on its own schedule, because I had built most of it and I knew exactly which stones to remove. Monday morning arrived the way all decisive mornings do, quietly, without ceremony, without any indication on the surface that everything underneath was about to shift permanently. Their first official board meeting under new leadership was scheduled for 9 a.m. I was not invited. I did not need to be. At 8:42, my first email was opened. I know because I had requested read receipts, a small detail, a quiet formality, the kind of thing that looks like professionalism and functions like surveillance. At 8:47, the supplier replied. The message was polite, corporate, and devastating. We were unaware of the ownership transition. As per Clause 7B of our existing agreement, we require written confirmation from the original signatory before continuing shipment. Clause 7B. My clause. The one I had drafted and inserted 3 years ago during a routine contract renewal that nobody else in that office had read closely enough to question. At 8:53, the regional distributor called Armin directly. I know this because at 8:55 my phone began filling with messages from him. Isla, what did you send them? Isla, answer me. Isla, this is not the time for this. I did not respond. At 9:02, I forwarded the compliance documentation I had quietly filed the previous week to the investor Armin had been courting. The email was professional, measured, and precise. I noted that I had not yet authorized the operational transfer of vendor relationships and that liquidity risk remained elevated pending due diligence confirmation. I did not accuse anyone of anything. I simply shared facts. Facts have a way of doing damage that accusations never can, because facts cannot be dismissed as emotion. At 9:11, my father called. I let it ring. At 9:14, the investor pulled out of the Monday announcement. At 9:20, shipment was frozen pending authorization. At 9:27, their projected valuation dropped before it had even had the chance to stabilize. And at 9:31, my office doorbell rang. I already knew who it was before I opened the door. Armin looked different without the wedding lights and the applause and the arm around my waist. He looked smaller somehow, like a man who had rehearsed a performance for months and was now standing in a room where the stage had been removed. What are you doing? He demanded. His voice was tight, controlled, trying to stay authoritative and failing slightly at the edges. I leaned against my kitchen counter with my coffee in both hands and looked at him the way you look at something you have finally seen clearly after a very long time of seeing it wrong. I'm protecting my assets, I said. You're sabotaging us, he said. No, I said. I'm exercising rights you forgot I still have. His jaw tightened in that way it used to when he was calculating something, running numbers in his head, looking for a different angle. You're going to ruin the family, he said. I smiled at him. I didn't perform it. It arrived genuinely, which I think was more unsettling to him than anything else I could have done in that moment. They tried to erase me, I said. Silence stretched between us like a held breath. He was waiting for me to continue, to explain, to offer something he could negotiate with. Instead, I said the one thing he was not prepared for. I haven't even started yet. And this time, for the first time since I had known him, he believed me completely. They did not collapse instantly. That would have been too clean, too cinematic, too much like justice arriving on schedule. What happened instead was an unraveling, slow and methodical and deeply uncomfortable for everyone involved except me. By Wednesday, 3 separate vendors had requested formal clarification regarding signatory authority and transitional obligations. By Thursday, the bank flagged structural inconsistencies in the ownership transfer documentation during a routine review that had been triggered by the compliance report I filed. By Friday, the investor publicly postponed engagement pending internal governance review, which in the language of investors means we no longer have confidence in the people running this, and we are waiting to see if they survive. My father showed up at my apartment that Friday evening. He did not call first. He stood in my living room like a guest who no longer recognized the house, like a man who had walked into a room expecting furniture and found only walls. He was not angry. Anger had been replaced by something worse, desperation. We can fix this privately, he said. Like you handled it publicly? I asked. He flinched. It was the smallest movement, barely visible, but I had been watching my father's face for 30 years, and I knew every variation of it. Amaya did not come. She sent a message instead. You're ruining my honeymoon. I read it twice. I set my phone face down on the table. That one almost made me laugh, genuinely, not the controlled, composed laugh I had been using all week, but the real kind, the kind that comes from a place so far past hurt that it has looped around into something stranger. Armin came one final time. He arrived at night, no aggression, no performance, just a man who looked genuinely tired for the first time since I had known him. He sat across from me and said, quietly, "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I looked at him for a long time, long enough that he shifted slightly in his seat. "Did you love me?" I asked. "Or did you position me?" He didn't answer. He looked at the table, then at the wall, then at his hands, and he did not answer. And that was my closure. Not a confession, not an apology, not a scene. Just a silence that confirmed everything I already knew and made it impossible for him to pretend otherwise. I didn't need him to say it. The silence said it with more precision than words ever could. By the end of that week, emergency board sessions were being called. Legal teams were involved. Questions were being raised about document timing and signature authentication. People were asking out loud why the original signatory had not been consulted during a major ownership transition. Nobody could provide a clean answer because there wasn't one. The beautiful thing, the thing they had never anticipated, was that I never accused anyone directly. I did not storm into that boardroom. I did not call journalists or post on social media or send angry letters to anyone's relatives. I simply requested audits. I raised procedural questions through the appropriate channels. I filed compliance documentation with the correct regulatory bodies. And audits do not scream. They dissect. They move slowly and quietly, and they do not care about feelings or family or the fact that someone's honeymoon is being inconvenienced. By Sunday evening, my father's lawyer reached out. The message was professional and careful and read like something that had been rewritten several times before being sent. Missa, we would like to discuss a settlement. Settlement. It is an interesting word when you hear it from the side of the table that has leverage. Because I was not negotiating out of emotion anymore. I was not the woman under the blanket with her heart pounding so loud she was afraid they would hear it through the car door. I was not the woman watching her name removed from a company she had rebuilt while a crowd applauded and her fiancé whispered damage control in her ear. I was negotiating from a position of complete clarity, with documentation, with leverage, and with one final move that none of them had seen coming. The settlement meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at noon. Neutral office, glass walls, the kind of corporate space designed to make everything feel procedural and remove the human temperature from the room. My father was there. His lawyer was there. Armin was there. They had arranged themselves on one side of the table in the way people do when they are expecting a confrontation, braced, prepared to defend, already calculating what they were willing to concede. They expected me to demand my shares back. They expected emotion dressed up as strategy. They expected me to want back inside the structure they had tried to remove me from, to fight for my seat at a table that had already shown me what it thought of me. Instead, I sat down, set my bag beside my chair, and slid a single folder across the table without a word. "I'm not here to reclaim control," I said, and I watched confusion move across their faces like weather. "I'm here to exit." Inside that folder was a buyout proposal. Fair market valuation, independently assessed. Clean transfer of my remaining interests. Immediate liquidity requirement with a specific transfer deadline. And attached to the back of the proposal was a compliance report I had filed the previous week with a regulatory authority, not against any individual, but against the structural irregularities present in the backdated documentation. I had not accused anyone of fraud. I had simply noted inconsistencies and requested formal review. If I am erased from ownership, I said calmly, then my signature cannot legitimately appear on transitional documentation. If it does appear, and if the dates do not align with verified authentication records, that becomes a matter for the reviewing authority, not for this table. Armin went pale in the way people go pale when they realize the thing they thought was contained has been precisely, deliberately uncontainable. My father's hand trembled slightly against the table, just his fingers, just for a moment. "You would destroy us," he said. His voice was very quiet. I met his eyes directly, the way I had not been able to do at the wedding, the way I had not been able to do under that blanket, the way I had not been able to do for most of my life, because I had been too busy holding things together to look clearly at what I was holding together for. "No," I said. "I'm choosing not to save you. There is a difference." I stood. I picked up my bag. "Approve the buyout by Friday," I said, "or allow the audit to proceed on its current timeline. Either way, I'm done waiting." I walked out of that glass-walled room, and I did not look back. By Thursday evening, the funds had been transferred in full. I submitted my formal resignation the following morning. The public narrative was clean, controlled, professionally managed by people who suddenly had very strong motivation to protect my reputation along with their own. Founder exits amid governance restructuring. Several outlets picked it up as a story about generational transition in family businesses. Graceful, people said. Dignified. They had no idea. Amaya texted once more, 3 days after the transfer cleared. Was it worth it? I looked at that message for a long time. I thought about answering it. I thought about explaining that this was never about revenge, that revenge is a reaction, and what I had done was a correction, that there is a fundamental difference between burning something down because you are angry and simply declining to hold it up any longer. But I didn't reply, because she already knew the answer, and explaining it would have been a gift she hadn't earned. The morning before her wedding, they thought I was hiding under a blanket. They thought Rafi was being dramatic. They thought the woman who had paid for the flowers and the venue and the designer and the emergency upgrade and the loan and the years of quiet sacrifice would do what she had always done, absorb it, process it privately, and continue showing up. They never understood that the woman who knew how to hold everything together also knew, better than anyone, exactly what to remove to let it fall. I left with capital. I left with my reputation intact. I left with vendor relationships, industry contacts, and a professional record that no backdated document could touch. But most importantly, I left with clarity, the kind that only arrives when you have finally stopped making yourself smaller to fit inside someone else's story. They built a future on the assumption that I would stay in the corner they had assigned me. They decorated it beautifully. They even invited me to fund it. And then I walked out quietly on my own terms, with everything that actually mattered. I don't fund weddings anymore. I don't co-sign loans for people who see my name as a resource rather than a person. I don't stay under blankets. I don't wait until after the wedding to ask the difficult questions. Rafi still drives for me occasionally. Last month, he picked me up from a meeting across the city, and when I got in the car, he looked at me in the rearview mirror with that same quiet, steady expression he has always had, and he said, "You did well, Missa." I looked out the window at the city moving past, and I thought about the woman who had been lying under that blanket, heart-pounding, barely breathing, trying to understand what she was hearing. I thought about how much she had carried and how little she had been seen and how completely. Irreversibly, everything had changed in the space of 30 minutes on a quiet stretch of road because one loyal man had chosen to protect her when everyone else was busy using her. "Thank you, Rafi," I said. And I meant it in every possible way those two words can be meant. At Revenge Chronicles, we believe that the most powerful thing a woman can do is not scream when they wrong her. It is organize. It is document. It is wait for exactly the right moment and then move with the kind of precision that leaves no room for doubt and no space for negotiation except on her terms. They thought the story ended under a blanket. It was only just beginning.